Who says you have to wait until December? Grab your scraps and let's sew a stocking, a festive placemat, and some cute napkin rings. Christmas in July starts now.
So to make this double-sided Dresden plate placemat, you're going to need a variety of Christmas fabrics. And right here I have, well, I've already started cutting it, so I have 12 different back quarters that I've cut. You can see in all different colors, checks. And I purchased this on Amazon. And this will be the Christmas side of our double-sided placemat. And then I have just a few here of the grays that I'm going to use for the other side. So what I'm doing is I'm making these placemats so that I can use the gray side, which matches my kitchen and dining room decor. And so I'm using that for the everyday side of my placemat. And then all I have to do is turn it over to get my Christmas side when Christmas comes. So I'll show you that I've already made the gray side. And how I did this was I used my Dresden plate ruler. And you can use any Dresden ruler that you want, but I cut it at the 6-inch line up here so that all my Dresdens were 6 inches. And that's going to turn out about a 15-inch circle placemat. And if you want to make a table topper, you can do the same thing. Just cut it at the 8-inch up here, and then that'll give you a much larger circle placemat or table topper that you can put in the center of your table. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is to cut out all of our Dresdens. And I stack these in like 2 or 3 layers in order to cut my Dresdens out so that, you know, save time. So I've already cut all of my Dresdens here. I stacked them in the order that I want to place them in the circle so that there's a variety of some, you know, lighter and darker colors. Alright, so now I'm going to take all my wedges, my Christmas fabric, to the machine. And I'm going to put them right sides together. And I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam right down the sides here. Okay, one more thing I wanted to tell you before I sew them together is you're going to cut 20 blades of your Dresden, and I sew like 10 of them together, and then I'll sew the other 10 together. So I don't sew them all at one time. And that way, when I'm done with the first 10 and I'll sew the second 10, then I'll come back and sew those 2 portions together. Okay. Okay, so the next thing you're going to do is to cut a piece of batting the size that your placemat will fit on. Let's see, my batting here is about 15 inches. Okay, so you're going to want to layer the first one on top like this. And don't forget to iron it first. I haven't ironed mine yet. And I use 100% cotton batting, so that if you ever put anything hot, a hot plate or anything on your placemat, you don't have to worry about the heat. The next thing I'm going to do is take my second layer, and I just want to make sure that it is definitely all even with the other layer. It looks good, but I still need to iron them, so we'll check them again after I iron them. But so the next thing that you would do after you iron them is take them. You want to put your first layer like this over your batting, and then you're going to take your second layer and put it face down with your first layer. Make sure it's all nice and even around the sides. And then you'll go to your machine and you're going to do a 1/4 inch seam around the whole thing, but you want to leave a space of about 2 blades wide so that you can turn it out. And this is the no binding method. This way you don't have to worry about matching your binding so that, you know, it will go with the gray and the Christmas. This way you don't have to do that. Okay, so I'm going to go iron this up, and I'm going to do the sewing, and then I'll meet you right back here. Okay, so I've sewed it all the way around, and I'm just going to start to turn it out. Well, before I do that, I want to cut off my batting. Okay, so now I'll just turn it out. And you can use a turner, you know, or anything you need to get into the edging just to make sure that you turn it all out nice and even. Okay. So I'm going to go through and fix these edges. And okay, so the next thing you'll do is this over here. Is iron it, and you can take it back to the machine and then quilt it. And then you'll sew a top stitch all the way around the outer edge. But I'll do that after I quilt it. And as far as quilting goes, you can do anything you want. You can do an all over pattern, or you can go in between the lines here in the seams. You can do that. And that's probably what I'll do, is just go in between the seams. Okay, so before we do that, we need a circle to go in the middle of each of our sides here. So you'll pick the fabric, whatever fabric you prefer, and you're going to cut a circle. Let's see. Let's start on the end. Circle is about 3 inches wide, so you'll want to do at least an inch larger, so about a 4-inch diameter circle. And I'll show you how to do that. You'll sew your circle on when you go to quilt your top, you know, when you're quilting it. Okay, to make the circle, you can use a circle ruler, or, you know, any of the circle rulers they have out there. I'm just going to take a piece of fabric. This fabric is like 5 by 4. I'm going to fold it in half lengthwise. So this is your 4-inch mark here. And I'm going to fold it again in half, just like this. And so I'll just take it from here and just make a circle, just like that. Okay. You can use any lightweight interfacing. I don't have really any except for some SF101, so I'll probably use that, but I'm not going to iron it yet. So that way you don't get it stuck before you need to. Let's see. So I'll just take some of that SF101 and I'll make a circle out of it, just like this. Okay, so here's our circle. I just used a 1/4 inch seam to go all the way around it. I trimmed it just a little, but I want to go in and just cut some little slits all the way around it, but don't go through the thread. Just cutting it a little bit so that when we turn it out, it'll turn out good. And you can do the same thing when you're turning out your mat here as well. So now just go to the opening and turn it right side out. Okay, so where your opening is, you're just going to fold that over on this way. And again on the with the white layer. Now you can do this with a piece of fabric as well. You don't have to use interfacing. If all you have is just a little piece of white fabric or whatever fabric will work. Okay, and then I'll go back around it and sew it with a top stitch, and then we'll put it right there in the middle over our opening. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to do the same thing for one on the back. Okay, so here's the circle for my gray side, and I just wanted to clarify that you put the right side of your gray side to the bumpy side of the interfacing. And that way when you turn it out, the bumpy side's on the back and you could just iron it on here, which will help you when you go to sew it. It'll keep it in place. Okay, so I wanted to show you that I ironed on my middle circle to the gray side, and now I'm going to iron on the one to the Christmas side. And I went ahead and decided to do this black and white checkered in the middle just to offset all the red. So I sewed this, and now I'm going to turn it out, and you can use a turner or whatever to, I'm just going to use my finger. Okay. So now I'm going to turn this in where the opening is, and I will clip it, and then I'm just going to go and top stitch it all the way around to close up this opening. Okay, so I sewed it right on the edge, about 1/8 of an inch around the edge, all the way around. Okay, so now I'm going to iron it on to the center. So the next thing we're going to do is close up this opening. I'm just going to turn it. I'm going to start with the middle, turning it so that I can make it even with the other side. There, and then I'm going to clip it. And then now we can work on the sides. Just want to make sure I tuck in, make it all nice and even. Put that part. Okay, so now I'm going to take it to the machine, and I'm going to top stitch it all the way around, and you'll want to use probably a 3 or 3.5 top stitch length in order to top stitch it, because it's going to be thick on the edges. And then I'll just go through and I'm going to follow the lines in here with each of the blades and just quilt it. And I think I'll do like a spiral quilting right in the middle. So here's what the placemat looks like all quilted. Christmas side, and then the gray side. Okay, so for today's project, we are going to make some napkin rings. And I'm using this leftover mesh holder. It had, mesh that I used to make wreaths. I like these better than a paper towel holder because they're a little bit smaller of an opening, and the cardboard is a lot more sturdier than a paper towel holder. So you see I've marked on it. I've already cut one off, and I'm going to cut another one what I'm doing is I'm marking them at about 1 3/4 of an inch, because I want it to be 1 1/2, and so I want to make sure that I have enough that I can go and trim the edges to make sure they're even. So I'm going to cut another one, and then I'm using some Christmas fabric, and then I wanted to show you that you could use any kind of fabric. This is actually, Christmassy itself. But it could be also used for like every day. You can make these for any occasion, any season. And then you'll need a couple of batting strips for each one that you make. And I'm cutting these at about at least 5 inches, your fabric, or 6 inches. It's a great scrap buster because you can use any leftover scraps to make these. And even your leftover scraps of batting will work great with this. Okay, so let's get started. Now, first thing I'm going to do, like I said, is we're going to cut our pieces out. And I've already cut one, so I want to show you that I have it ready. And this was on the end, so the manufacturing edge was nice and smooth. And then when I cut this side, I just kind of trimmed it to make it as even and smooth as I could. Okay, and so yes, you will need also a glue gun and some scissors, rotary cutter, whatever you need to cut your cardboard. You could use an X-Acto knife if you need it. Craft knife would work with that. Okay, and so I've got my glue gun ready, and I'm just going to take, my glue gun doesn't stretch very far, so I'm going to take a little bit of the glue, just make a little line there, and I'm going to start wrapping my batting. But I don't want to put that edge right there just yet, because so I'm placing it with some extra here, and I'm just going to start by you don't need it very much, just a couple of dots here and there, or lines. Just want to bring it over until they meet. You want to make sure that you butt these up against each other, not overlap them, because you're going to put 2 layers of the batting. Now, if you prefer to only put 1 layer, you can do that. I just like the look of it being a little, thicker. And I'll just go in and put another dab here. That this side. Okay. So now I'll put my next layer, and I'm going to start by putting glue over this gap where the 2 ends met. And then again, I'm going to start it covering that seam. And that way you're not going to have like the ends butting up in the same place. And then once I reach this side, I'm going to cut off this excess. Okay, and then I can glue. And roll it to meet. If you still have a little bit of excess, you can cut that off after you glue it down. Okay. So now the next thing we just need to do is to wrap our fabric around it. Okay, and so I'm going to start just placing glue over that where these two ends meet. And then I'm going to center my piece of fabric right over that. You can also do this with fabric glue. Um, Fabric glue will stick really well to paper as well. You can use fabric glue for, scrapbooking and stuff too. So it'll just take longer for it to adhere. Okay, and then when I get to the end here, I want to fold this over to hide that raw seam, but I'm going to cut a little bit of it off because it's a little long. Okay. And so I'm going to fold it over like a hem, and that way it'll cover that edge and it'll look nice. Have a nice little finish there. And it won't unravel over time. So then I'll just take my glue and put a line right across there. And then fold this over. And you could go back and put like a piece of ribbon over that if you see the glue. And I'll probably do that. I have some, just like a quarter of an inch or 3/8 of an inch ribbon to put across there. Okay, so the next step is to fold our edges inside the little roll. And so to do that, we're going to have to put that glue inside along the the inside of the cardboard. And I just do a little section at a time. You want to use something to protect your fingers from the glue. Just fold it in like that. Push it down a little bit so it goes even over that edge. Okay, and if there's a little bit that's kind of sticking up, then I'll just go in and put a little dab of glue and right inside here. And then press it down to cover it. String hanging. Okay, and then you're going to go and do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so I'll just finish up this end and then I'll meet you right back here. Okay, so I glued a ribbon across that seam right there. I had this little shiny red ribbon to put there. So now I'm going to embellish it. I have this little holly leaf and some of these red berries that I'm just going to glue right there in the middle so that when it's in our napkin, it's going to look really cute. So I'm just going to glue this to the leaf first. Place it right there in the center. our leaf. Okay. And then we can glue it. I'm going to kind of glue it a little bit cat corner. And now we can take a ribbon or a piece of string. I've got this really pretty candy cane looking string. And just going to tie it around here. And then just make a bow. I'm just going to go ahead and double up on my bow. And you can let it hang a little bit if you want, or you can cut it off, you know, however, whatever length that you want it. And you can use ribbon instead of the string if you want. Cut some of this off. Okay, and now we'll put it in a napkin, and I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so here we are. These are some other napkin rings that I made last year, and this is the one we made today that I embellished. So you can see you have lots of different choices that you can do to make your napkin rings match your decor for Christmas. Okay, so today I'm going to show you how to make a quilted stocking. So the supplies we're going to need are 5-inch squares in a white. My white is a little bit more of a off-white or a creamy white. And then a variety of Christmas fabrics. I've chosen these. And I have some ecru colored cotton that I'm going to use for the lining. Because you won't really see the lining, so it doesn't really matter the color. And our backs of our stockings are going to be this velvet in burgundy, and the cuff will be the velvet. Okay, so for the template, all you need to do is just trace another stocking about the same size. And I didn't trace mine, I drew it out. And I just drew it on some printer paper, and then I put the two pieces together. I did the bottom on one separate page, and then I turned the top, and then I just taped them together to make my template. And so we don't need this just yet, but I just wanted to show you how to do that. What we're going to do is make half square triangles. So you'll pair one of your 5-inch white with your 5-inch Christmas fabric, and you're going to put them right sides together. And before we get started, I want to tell you that I've cut out all mine from back corners, but you can just get charm packs of your favorite Christmas fabric and also of the white. So we just put them right sides together, and then you sew a 1/4 inch seam around the entire square. So we're going to go to the machine and do that. Okay, so I've sewed my block all the way around with a 1/4 inch seam. Now I'm going to cut it in a diagonal. And I'll carefully turn it and cut it corner to corner. Okay, and that's going to give us 4 half square triangles. These are big enough so that you can square them up at about 3 inches, but I'm going to square them up at 2.5 inches. I just like the size. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do, I've sewn all of my little squares and ironed them flat. So now it's just to lay them out however you want to lay them out. And I like, let's see, I'm thinking I'm going to put them in a pinwheel pattern. And you're going to want to make it as wide as you need to in order to accommodate your stocking. If you want a bigger stocking or smaller, just measure your template, and that way you can decide how wide you need it to be and how long you need it to be. And you can see that I made some out of the velvet that I'm going to be backing it with, just so that I can incorporate some of the back onto the front. And so I'll just continue to lay this out, and then once you have it all laid out, you sew them all together in that pattern, and this is what you'll get. I've ironed it flat. So the next thing I would do is to layer it with a piece of batting and the backing of our stocking. Now you can do this a few different ways. I say the backing, I mean the lining. So how I would do this is, if you want your lining to be quilted along with your top, you would lay the lining out just like you're going to quilt a quilt, and put your batting on top of that, and then the front of your stocking on top of that. And then I would take it to the machine and quilt it. And this, whenever you sew your stocking pieces together, you'll have a seam on the inside of your stocking, but you can serge those edges with your serger or zigzag stitch them so that it looks, a little bit cleaner. The other way you can do this is to just layer your top piece with your batting and quilt it, or you can leave it unquilted if you prefer, just to have it like this, but I'm going to quilt mine. And then you would make a lining, cutting out your lining with your template, and just insert that lining so that you don't have seams showing inside of your stocking. But it's a stocking, I'm not worried about that. I don't think it's that big of a deal. You're just going to put all your stocking stuffers in it. So I'm just going to go ahead and quilt both of my layers together, the lining and the top. And then when it comes to the back, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to take your piece of velvet and you're going to line it with your lining fabric. And you can leave out the piece of batting on the back if you want. I'm probably going to put mine in because of the velvet that I'm using is like that stretchy velvet. It's really slinky and stretchy. And so I want to give it some sturdiness, and I'm probably going to go ahead and put the piece of batting in that. It's going to make your seams on the inside of your stocking thick, but as long as you serge or zigzag stitch them, it should be okay. I'm going to layer this together and quilt it, and then I'll come back and cut out my template. So here is my quilted top, and all I did was just follow the lines here and crisscross it, and you can see that on the back what it looks like. Now I'm going to set this aside, and I'm going to start on the back piece. Okay, so I've finished quilting my velvet. It was a little tricky because the velvet is stretchy, but I think it came out great. Okay, and you see the inside quilting. So now all we need to do is cut out our template. I'm going to put it on here, and then I'll pin it, and then cut it out. You can use a rotary cutter to cut it out, or you can use a pair of scissors, whichever you prefer. I'm probably just going to pin it and use my scissors. And then I will do the same thing to my other panel. Now you got to remember, whenever you're cutting them out, you want whichever direction you want your stocking. Like I want it in this direction. So I will cut my front piece out like this, but then when you go to cut the back, you're going to want to do the opposite and cut the back out this way, so that when you meet them together, they'll align and be in the right directions. Okay, so I pinned it with a couple of safety pins. I'm going to cut it out a little bit bigger than my template, just to allow for the seam allowance, and so that I get it the width that I want, because when I turn it out, I still want it to be pretty, wide. I don't want it to be too narrow. Okay, and I might start it off with my rotary cutter and then use the scissors. And then I'll just pin it, and there's our front. So now I will cut out the back, remembering to turn the template over. Okay, so I've cut my two sides out. Now all we need to do is to bring them right sides together, line them up straight. I'm going to pin the top, even though I'm not sewing the top. Just want to make sure that they stay together. Okay. And then I'll start pinning. I'm using these clips, which are so much nicer than a pin whenever you want to sew thick pieces together. Okay, and then I'm just going to bring it to the machine, and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam all the way around except for the top. So I sewed it a 1/4 inch away, and then I went back and I used a zigzag stitch to just finish the edges. If you have a serger, you could do that. Use a serger and it would look nice. So now I'm going to turn it out. Make sure I'm getting all the edges, and you can use a tool, a turner tool, to do that if you want. I'm just going to use my hands. So you'll need to iron it flat. Not bad. Turn it over. I really like this quilting on the back of the velvet. It's really pretty. So now I'm going to make a hanger to go in the corner. So then we'll do the cuff that will fold over and go right over this, and we're going to use the velvet to do that. I've cut out my fabric for the cuff of the stocking, and I'm using a piece of the velvet and the same lining fabric, and I'm going to line that with some interfacing so that it gives it some body whenever I attach it to the velvet cuff. And so how I'm going to do this is, first of all, I cut my pieces 16 by 4.5 inches. My cuff, I measured around the top, and it's like 14. So I just cut it a little bit longer to make sure that I've got plenty of room. And then I'm going to iron my piece of interfacing to this. And then I will put them right sides together with my velvet. Then I'm going to go to the machine, and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam all along the top so that it attaches to my cuff. And I also wanted to show you that I'm making the hanger, and I have a 2.5 by 4 inch piece for the hanger, And I'm also going to put a little piece of interfacing on my hanger. And then for that, you're just going to fold it over in half and then let it go, and then come back in and fold it in towards that middle line, that center line. And you'll do that twice and then fold it over like this. And then I'll sew a top stitch to sew this closed, and also another one on the other end too, just to give it, 2 lines of stitching. And then you'll just turn it over and put that inside the top of your stocking when we put the cup in there, and I'll show you all that when we get to it. Okay, so I sewed the hanger on both sides, the top stitch. And so we're just going to fold it in half. You're going to put your hanger upside down. You want to put one end on the front right into that seam. And I'm going to clip it. And then the other side, you'll put in the back. And then clip that. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is put our cuff inside the top, like this. And then we will sew a 1/4 inch seam all the way around, sewing in our cuff along with our hanger. Okay, so now all we have to do is turn it out. And here is our stocking. And I'm going to hang it up so you can see how it looks hanging. And then the back looks just as good as the front. So, I mean, you could use either side. If you prefer the velvet side, you could use that side to show. So here's our stocking. And I put it on my door so you can see it against a white background. And here's the velvet side. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial. Please let me know if you have any questions or anything in the comments below. And please don't forget to like and subscribe my channel. Thank you.